Good morning, Citizen Peterson. First, I have a bunch of questions, and I want to have them answered immediately. Like, you have a post on Quora in which you encourage all children to incur skateboarding injuries. but also stated in this post, you wrote that do not try to rescue someone who does not want to be rescued, and be very careful about rescuing someone who does. And can you reconcile this with what you stated about transcendent morality and the heroic impulse that I guess men are supposed to be born with?
Okay. So, well, the skateboarding question is, I have a book coming out in 2018 called 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. And one of the chapters in there is from that Quora posting, and it's called Don't Bother Children When They're Skateboarding. And it's sort of associated with what I had said earlier about parkour, for example, is that, kids need to go out and push themselves against danger, because that's what life is pushing yourself against danger. And when you see kids doing things that are dangerous but spectacular, then you kind of have a moral obligation to back the hell off and let them experiment with their own mortality, because you can't keep them safe. The best thing you can do is make them able and courageous. And I would say that that's a more difficult lesson, generally speaking, for mothers to learn than for fathers to learn, and that was Freud's fundamental observation, but it's absolutely crucial. And so I've seen kids do, you can obviously be a fool on a skateboard, although the distinction between being a fool and developing yourself is not as clear as people might like to imagine. And when kids are out there with no helmet and doing dangerous things, it's like there's a part of me that of course is very worried about it, but there's another part of me that admires it very much, because they're practicing what they need to practice in order to cope with the world. Okay, so there's that. Now, the other one was rescuing people. Yeah. Well, I got this partly from Carl Rogers, because Rogers he's a clinician, a very famous clinician, and he was a Christian missionary to begin with, but he didn't end up that way. But he was very interested in the utility of listening as a means of redemption, essentially. And listening, by the way, is if you have someone that you know that has a problem, the best thing you can often do is listen to them if they're actually trying to communicate, because people configure themselves through speech. And most people can't think, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean the way they think is by talking, and they can't talk unless they have someone to talk to. And it's partly because they're bouncing the idea off them and seeing if it makes sense and seeing how the person responds. So listening is a great thing. But Rogers was also interested in the preconditions for having a redemptive relationship, and that could be a therapeutic relationship or an intimate relationship. And one of the things he claimed was that unless the person was aiming upward, there was nothing you could do about it. And that seemed to be associated with this idea of that initial choice, say, between good and evil. See, once someone comes to therapy, they've already done something. They've already said, I have a problem, conceivably I could fix it, and I need to do something about it. And then, so half the work is already done by the time they show up, because they've already said, well, things aren't as good as they could be, and I could do something about it. The question is, can you do anything about someone who isn't at that state? And my observation, and this is Roger's observation as well, is that you can't. I think you can serve by example, but until the person has decided on their own that they're wrong, and that's why they're suffering, that there's something wrong about what they're doing, and that they want to fix it, I think that even trying to hammer against that often makes it worse. So, and I know that Solzhenitsyn, when he was talking about the communist ideologues, the really hardcore communist ideologues that were eaten up by the Gulag Archipelago system, sort of devoured by their own, he saw the same thing, was that until they were willing to admit that something was wrong with the manner in which they had construed the world, that it had resulted in their own demise, that there was actually no way of communicating with them. They're in kind of an authoritarian bubble. And so I don't think that...
So even if you orient yourself as an archetypal hero, there's no way you can get through that barrier that...
Well, I think that that's part of the issue of free will. I do not think that people can learn unless they admit that they're wrong. There's this play, The Cocktail Hour by T.S. Eliot, and he has this woman in the play, and she comes up to a psychiatrist and she says, just in the course of casual conversation, she says, I really hope there's something wrong with me. And of course the psychiatrist is a bit taken aback by that, and he says, well, why in the world would you hope such a thing? And she says something like, Well, like I'm suffering, man. Things are not good for me. I'm having a dreadful time of it. And as far as I can tell, there's only two possibilities. Either the world, in its essence, is conspiring against me and I'm doomed because what am I going to do about the world? Like it's just built into the structure of reality. Or I'm doing something wrong. So I'm really hoping that I'm doing something wrong, because if I am, then maybe I could fix it and I'd stop suffering. And it's something like that. And see, it's also, I think that if your life isn't what it could be and you're suffering, then it seems to me that that should be sufficient evidence that you don't know enough. And if that isn't sufficient evidence that you don't know enough, then I don't know how anyone else could provide you with that evidence. And so I'm going to leave it at that.
This is psychological rescue, not like rescuing someone who's drowning, for example.
Yes, you can rescue people when they're drowning even if they don't want you to.
Perfect.
I'll tell you something about that though. Something interesting about that, and that's relevant, is that, you know, I don't know how many of you know how you rescue someone who's drowning. You do it like this, right? You come to them like this, and you push them away with your foot. If they're, I'm telling you, that's what you do if you're a lifeguard, because if they're panicking and they grab you, you both drown. And that's stupid, because then you both drown, right? And so, and that's a really good way, that's a really good metaphor for trying to help someone too. It's like when people are in real trouble, you know, some of it's they're confused and some of it is that their life has collapsed around them and there's some malevolence there and there's some desire for vengeance. It's just like one dangerous mess. And if you're going to wade in there unprepared, the probability that they're going to take you down compared to you elevating them is very, very high. You know, because you don't even know what your damn psychological stability rests on. You might be saying just because you're lucky and surrounded by sane people, that doesn't mean that you have the psychological wherewithal to really pull someone up from the depths of the underworld, especially if they've also got one foot in hell. So you should bloody well be careful about doing that kind of thing. It's hubristic to attempt it, and I would definitely caution people very carefully about trying to rescue someone who doesn't want to be rescued. It's very dangerous activity, and it can easily be counterproductive.